In March 2025, China conducted a high-profile space exercise deploying 5 high-altitude GEO satellites with 36,000 kilometers altitude, in a maneuver aimed directly at US military assets. The satellites, believed to be part of the Shijian series, did not mark a new launch but were part of a military drill focused on the WGS communication satellites and SBIRS early warning satellites. The exercise raised concerns within the US military, with experts warning that China's growing space capabilities could pose a serious threat to US operations in the region. US Space Operations Deputy Assistant Secretary Michael A. Gaitline quickly saw through the maneuver, knowing that this was directly targeting US key military satellites. US General have reacted strongly to China's recent space activities. On April 3rd, during a hearing of the US-China Economic and Security Review Commission, Chance Saltzman, Chief of Space Operations of the United States Space Force, noted that space has long been a battleground and that China has been preparing for this for 20 years. He emphasized that the US could no longer hold back and called for the approval of $60 billion and the lifting of restrictions, warning that if not, the US would be the one to suffer. His comments marked the start of a new space race, exposing China's ambitions and signaling that the US must take action. The WGS Broadband Global Satellite Communication System is a vital communication network for the US military, consisting of 10 satellites in GEO orbit, 36,000 kilometers above Earth, with 4 of them focused on the Asia-Pacific region. The system provides transmission bandwidth of up to 10 gigabytes per second, allowing real-time communications for US military assets such as aircraft carriers, strike groups, F-35 fighter jets, drones, and command centers. The Space-Based Infrared System, SBIRS, another key US asset, is often referred to as America's eye in the sky. With 6 GEO satellites, 2 of which monitor the Asia-Pacific, SBIRS uses infrared sensors to detect heat signatures from enemy missiles launches, including China's Dongfeng missiles. This makes SBIRS a critical component of US missile defense. But why is China targeting military satellites in high orbit? It's because this is one of the few methods available to them. High-altitude GEO satellites are positioned 36,000 kilometers above Earth, far beyond the reach of ground-based missiles. High-energy lasers fired from Earth lose power as they pass through the atmosphere, and space-based lasers would require massive power plants in orbit, something China is currently lacking. Electromagnetic interference also doesn't work, as GEO satellites are built to resist such disruptions. As a result, capturing satellites has become China's last resort. China's most recent attempt to capture a satellite came in January 2022 when a robot arm grabbed a decommissioned Beidou satellite. However, this satellite was stationary, weighed just 4 tons, and was moved to a GEO orbit 300 kilometers above Earth geostationary orbit. In contrast, the US satellites China is targeting are much larger, weighing 8 tons each. China's SJ-23 robotic arm can only handle 6 tons, posing a significant challenge. These US satellites are built from steel, can maneuver to avoid capture, and are monitored by radar 24/7. They may have been protected by robotic satellites. To prepare for future attempts to capture US satellites, China deployed 5 SJ-23 satellites in March to practice space entanglement. Without this practice, they would have no chance of capturing US satellites. Despite these technological hurdles, the US has previously used its MEV-1 satellite to capture 10-ton satellites with a 3-ton robotic arm, while China's current 5-ton Shijian 23 can only handle 6 tons. One of the 5 Shijian 23 satellites is used as a scout, passively observing or using low-power signals to lock onto the coordinates of WGS or SBIRS satellites. 2 others serve as bodyguards, patrolling a few hundred kilometers away to monitor US ground radar and prevent a counterattack from US robotic satellites. The remaining 2 acts as offensive vanguards, quietly moving in to test the reactions of US satellites. Over time, China's satellites will gradually approach their US counterparts, and when close enough, they will charge forward using their robotic arms to capture or disable the satellites. Deploying these 5 Shijian 23 satellites was no small feat for China. With about 70 tons of launch capacity per year for high-altitude satellites, China used the Long March 3B rocket 5.5 tons, Long March 5 rocket 14 tons, and Long March 7A rocket 7 tons to send these satellites into orbit. The 5 SJ-23 satellites weighed around 25 tons, representing 36% of the country's annual launch capacity, marking a significant commitment of resources. China's Beidou navigation satellites alone take up to 45 tons of space, with 11 satellites each weighing 4 tons in geo-orbit. These satellites require regular replacements and repairs, just like the communication satellites in Shijian series. Altogether, these categories of satellites exceed the 70-ton launch limit. This indicates that China's launch capacity is under strain, balancing its existing satellites with the need to launch Shijian 23 satellites, demonstrating China's resolve to challenge the US. The presence of China's 5 space robots has caused a significant concern in the US, not because of the technology, but due to the potential for a surprise attack. WGS and SBIRS are vital for US operations in the Asia-Pacific, providing early warning and command. Chance Saltzman expressed his concerns during a March 2025 congressional hearing. He described China's space capability as a serious and destabilizing threat and warned that the coordinated actions of the SJ-23 satellites might be a rehearsal for a real combat. As a result, he proposed doubling the US Space Force budget for the 2025 fiscal year to $60 billion compared to $29.4 billion in 2024. To expedite the deployment of countermeasures. One of the key projects is the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA's Robotic Servicing of GEO Satellites, RSGS program. This satellite is equipped with dual robotic arm capable of capturing or tearing apart 10-ton satellites, with tools for cutting and welding, making it easy to dismantle Chinese satellites. It provides a way to protect US assets and counter China's space capabilities. An RSGS satellite can repair 20 to 30 GEO satellites, with Northrop Grumman planning to build more, creating a profitable commercial opportunity. DARPA's approach is to lead with one and others will follow, in stark contrast to China, which boasts about forming groups but only produces ineffective equipment. The RSGS, using Northrop Grumman's MRV satellite as its base, likely combines chemical and electric propulsion for enhanced maneuverability in GEO orbit, making it highly efficient at pursuing targets and adjusting positions. Weighing 7 tons, it carries plenty of fuel for long-term operations capable of engaging in prolonged missions. In comparison, China's Shijian 23, with limited fuel and slower speed, will struggle to keep up with the RSGS, which operates like an eagle hunting its prey. DARPA has developed the Robotic Servicing of GEO Satellites RSGS program, primarily focused on servicing the WGS and the SBIRS satellites. Built with military-grade protection, the RSGS is resistant to radiation and interference, making it nearly impervious to Chinese robotic arms. Its smart control system can predict the trajectory of Chinese satellites, enabling the US to act first and maintain an upper hand. The dual-arm robot was tested in November 2022 and was initially scheduled for launch in 2024, with services beginning in 2025. However, due to a budget of only $57 million for the 2023 fiscal year, technical integration slowed, delaying the project. Now, with a $60 billion budget, early deployment is becoming a reality. If China dares to engage, the US is ready to neutralize the threat. In April 2025, under a $13.5 billion contract, SpaceX secured $5.9 billion with additional funds expected to be allocated for upgrades to Starlink and Starshield, including laser communication systems. By 2024, SpaceX had already completed laser communication tests with its 7,000 low Earth orbit LEO satellites. The $60 billion budget may allocate $2 to $3 billion to deploy 50 kilowatt lasers, potentially targeting China's Beidou navigation satellites. This could spark a space defense conflict, which is not science fiction, but a viable strategic option for the US. Starlink's over 7,000 satellites already operating in LEO could be modified to carry 50 kilowatt laser weapons aimed at China's GEO Beidou satellites. The first satellite would strike for a few seconds, using 50 kilowatt of energy to target Beidou's optical or electronic systems, causing localized heating. A second satellite would follow, delivering another strike with the cumulative heat from multiple satellites potentially reaching 200 kilowatts or more. Starlink's defense orbit allows for quick switching between satellites, enabling sustained strikes on Beidou. Since Beidou's GEO satellites are stationary, they would have no escape and would likely suffer from damaged sensors or burned-out antennas after multiple attacks. What makes this tactic so effective? While 50 kilowatts per satellite may not seem like much, Starlink's number gives it an edge. At about $500,000 per satellite, it's a cost-effective way to threaten Chinese 8 Beidou GEO satellites. Beidou is essential for China's military navigation and timing systems, and disabling it would severely disrupt missile guidance and troop coordination. China has taken note of these developments. While Beidou satellites are designed to resist interference, they may not withstand sustained 50 kilowatt laser attacks from multiple Starlink satellites. If the US decides to take action, it could strike a significant blow to China's space infrastructure at relatively low costs. China has also relied on ground-based megawatt lasers to target US satellites like SBIRS, but these lasers lose much of their power when passing through the atmosphere. Studies suggest that a 1 megawatt laser, after traversing the atmosphere, may only retain a few kilowatts of effective power, which is insufficient to damage satellites in orbit. In fact, China's previous attempt to use ground lasers on US spy satellites in 2006 resulted in no damage, exposing significant technical shortcomings. The low orbit slowed down after the high orbit collapse, the life and death battle in the Western Pacific. In the event of a space battle, the focus could shift from high altitude to low altitude engagements in the Western Pacific. If China's space entanglement efforts succeed, the SJ-23 satellites capturing several WGS and SBIRS satellites along with a few GPS satellites, the US would experience short-term setbacks in communications and missile warning. The loss of WGS would sever communication links for the US aircraft carrier strike groups and the F-35 fighter jets, while the SBIRS satellites would no longer provide missile warning, and the loss of GPS would disable precision-guided munitions. But the US would also immediately deploy DARPA's RSGS satellites to target China's Beidou GEO satellites. The 11 Beidou satellites, 3 of which provide coverage for China's surrounding areas and 8 positioned in inclined orbit to enhance Asia-Pacific signals, will be vulnerable to quick dismantling by RSGS robotic arms. Meanwhile, China's Beidou satellites, which lack the advanced protection of US assets like SBIRS, would be bombarded by laser fire from low Earth orbit, eventually leading to their failure. Once the 11 Beidou GEO satellites are disabled, China's challenges will only begin. While the remaining 24 Beidou satellites offer global navigation coverage, the lack of GEO satellites for regional support will cause a significant drop in signal quality and accuracy in the Asia-Pacific. This will leave missiles without guidance, cause drones to crash, and prevent naval ships like the O-54A and O-52D from maintaining direction, potentially leading to collisions of self-destruction. Command centers will become ineffective, and China's civilian Beidou system will also face major disruptions. After the collapse of both high-altitude and low-altitude assets, the battlefield will shift to low Earth orbit. The US will rely on Starlink and Starshield to counter China's capabilities, while China will struggle to rely on its limited remote sensing satellites. Starlink's 7,000 plus satellites in low Earth orbit, 550 kilometers, provide faster laser link switching and complex encryption, replacing WGS for wide area communication. Each satellite has 6 kilowatt of power, supporting hundreds of terminals. The real-world experience from Ukraine proves this system's effectiveness. F-35s and aircraft carrier strike groups will remain command through Link 16 and Starlink, ensuring continuous joint command and control. Starshield is even more formidable, with hundreds of satellites in 2,000 kilometers orbit, providing secure military communications far superior to China's low Earth orbit's assets. Without GPS, Starlink can offer rough positioning through triangulation with accuracy between 50 and 100 meters. Although this is less precise than the 10 to 20 meters achievable with ground station calibration in Ukraine, it's still enough to prevent ships and aircraft from getting lost. However, additional radar support will be required to defend against China's DF-21D missiles. For reconnaissance, Starshield, equipped with optical and infrared sensors, offers 1 to 5 meter resolution, allowing it to monitor large targets like naval groups. Overall, the US will maintain its communication, reconnaissance, and rough positioning capabilities, allowing F-35s and aircraft carrier strike groups to continue operations, though their efficiency will not be as high as when high-altitude satellites were operational. Meanwhile, Starlink laser could also destroy hundreds of China's low Earth orbit satellites, potentially clearing China's satellite network within a few days. Even if China attempts to disrupt Starlink with missiles or lasers, SpaceX's ability to replace satellites at a rate of 3,000 tons per year means that even with 2,000 satellites lost, the US can quickly replenish its network and continue the fight. China, however, faces a more difficult situation. If the Beidou GEO satellites are taken down, the consequences will be dire. Beidou GEO provides navigation and timing services, which China's Dongfeng missiles rely on for precise targeting. The O54A and the O52D destroyers also depend on Beidou for command and communication. If these satellites are disabled, Dongfeng missiles will be unable to launch, naval firepower will be neutralized, and the battlefield will quickly spiral out of control. Low Earth orbit satellites were meant to step in, but China's low Earth orbit constellation is not prepared for warfare. There are fewer than 100 satellites and coverage is sparse. Communication relies on ground stations, leading to high latency. Worse still, these satellites are almost defenseless against Starlink's laser weapons, assumed to be 50 kilowatts, and a few rounds of laser fire could wipe them out. China's satellite network remains limited due to both capacity and technological constraints. In 2024, China was able to launch only 373 tons of payload into space, while the US launched 3,000 tons in the same year. This significant gap in launch capacity highlights the disparity between the two nations. Starlink's 7,000 plus satellites are supported by this much larger capacity. China plans to increase its launch capacity to 500 tons in 2025 with 100 planned missions, but it is still expected to trail behind the US in terms of overall capability. Although China has plans for its own low Earth orbit constellation, it currently has fewer than 100 satellites in orbit. Starlink, using their inter-satellite laser links, offers near-instant communication with minimal delay, while China's low Earth orbit satellites rely on ground stations with delays of several hundreds milliseconds, making real-time battlefield communications impossible. The result is that once Chinese naval vessels pass the first island chain, their communication will be disrupted and their command chains will collapse. With reconnaissance and navigation system failing, China's ability to fight effectively will be compromised. At this point, the US can quickly restore its high-altitude satellites, while China's GEO launch capacity in 2024 is 70 tons, surpassing the US's 60 tons. When it comes to heavy lift rockets, the US has the edge. With the Falcon Heavy capable of launching 26.7 tons per mission and the Falcon 9 able to launch 10 tons, the US can easily send 70 tons of GEO orbit within a week. Satellites like SBIRS and WGS can be quickly deployed once they are built. China's Long March 5 can only launch once a month with a payload of 14 tons per launch. By comparison, the US will have its high-altitude satellites in place while China's satellites may still be in the process of being launched. At that point, the US will target China's missile launches and deal a crushing blow, leaving China with no missiles and no choice but to surrender. This scenario doesn't even factor in SpaceX's Starship. While Starship hasn't yet launched payloads to GEO, it has a capability to do so. If a war breaks out and there's a need for rapid replenishment of GEO satellites like SBIRS and WGS, Starship can easily handle the task. With a single launch carrying 20 to 30 tons and up to 2 launches per week, this would double the US's launch capacity. Claims like the US will destroy China's satellites in 30 minutes may be exaggerated, but the gap in satellite capabilities between the US and China is clear. The US has a significant advantage in low Earth orbit operations, easily outmatching China. The US is actually not facing a lack of technology. Laser weapons, electromagnetic interference, robotic arm for capturing satellites, and direct impact techniques are all capabilities within the US arsenal. However, the deployment of these technologies have been delayed due to policy constraints, with some of these systems remaining unused while awaiting approval. In March 2025, Space News reported that the US tested airborne lasers in Hawaii, successfully destroying satellite sensors, demonstrating far greater flexibility than China's ground-based lasers. In 2020, the US MEV-1 satellite successfully captured a satellite 2 years before China. Electromagnetic interference technology was perfected in 2004, with the US deploying the counter-communication system that can disrupt satellite communications from the ground. This system was upgraded in 2023 to cover a wider range, including BeiDou's frequencies. The US Congress, wary of the potential controversy around weaponizing space, prefers to keep these capabilities under wraps. In short, China's technological lags behind, relying on copying others. While China pours money into space development, the lack of regulation and oversight is evident. Last summer, a private rocket company tested an engine near a residential area, and the rocket launched unexpectedly, causing confusion among locals who thought it was an alien invasion. There was no fine or accountability, as space development is a top priority for China, even at the risk of accidents. In contrast, the US conducts tests in desert isolation zones with vigorous approval processes to ensure safety. In 2024, the US Space Force budget was $30 billion, but it has now doubled to $60 billion to fully deploy its technological capabilities into space. China's space development. In recent years, China has set ambitious goals in space, pouring significant money into development. However, the gap between China and the US is not narrowing but actually widening. A prime example is the Land Exploration 4 satellite launched in August 2023. Marketed as the world's first GEO synthetic aperture radar SAR satellite, it claims to provide all-weather imaging to complement optical satellites. While China promotes this as a breakthrough, the reality is far from impressive. At GEO orbit, 36,000 kilometers away, the SAR resolution is extremely poor, much lower than the claims suggest. The resolution of the Land Exploration 4 satellite is almost 10 to 20 meters, according to Western estimates, with China not disclosing the actual resolution, which could be even lower. With this resolution, it can only capture rough details such as the outline of a city or a large ship in the Pacific. However, it would not be able to clearly identify aircraft or an aircraft carrier deck or details of missile launches. In contrast, the US Lacrosse SAR in low Earth orbit provides a much higher resolution of 0.3 to 1 meter, allowing it to clearly capture images of objects such as license plates. The GEO SAR, with its lower resolution, struggles to produce clear images. In terms of imaging speed, the GEO-SAR requires several hours to compile a single image, whereas US systems such as SBIRS infrared sensors can detect missiles' heat signatures within seconds, and the KH-11 optical satellites provides real-time, high-definition transmission. While China's Land Exploration 4 satellite would take hours to capture an image of the Western Pacific, US aircraft carriers would have already moved beyond its reach. The system requires high power with weak signals and antennas resembling large dish covers, consuming tens of kilowatts. Weighing 4 to 5 tons, the satellite was launched on a Long March 5 rocket. While China markets its GEO-SAR as the world's first, its actual capabilities fall short, making it a significant underachievement. The US has not pursued GEO-SAR technology not because it's incapable, but because it is unnecessary. The US uses its low Earth orbit lacrosse satellites to achieve clear, all-weather imagery. Instead of investing in GEO satellites with limited resolution, the US relies on SBIRS infrared and KH-11 optical systems for fast reactions and real-time, high-definition transmissions. The disparity in space technology between the US and China is no doubt substantial, with the US maintaining a clear technological advantage.